of Data2X.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jenna. I am really delighted for the honor of being here today with all of you in Punta del Este for my first Festival de Datos. Do I have any other first-timers here? Can I see a show of hands? All right, great to see all of you. And also great to see those of you who are more veterans to this event. This town hall represents the work of so many, and I'm especially thankful to GPSDD and Sightsavers for their collaboration on this session, for the panelists and speakers that we're going to hear from shortly, and to the sponsors of the event. Inclusive data is at the heart of creating a fair and equitable society. Inclusive data is about more than numbers and statistics. And it's about ensuring that every person is seen, heard, and counted. It's about striving to build a society that values diversity, recognizes the unique experiences of all people, and then using that data for information to solve the problems that confront us, including meeting the SDGs and really impacting the lives of the people that are here with us and the people that aren't here with us. I've been working in the data and digital development space including around inclusive data for about 20 years. And in that time, the data landscape has changed immensely. We've recently seen exponential change with new opportunities and challenges, things like citizen-generated data, better understanding of intersectional approaches, new data models, and new technology, such as advanced cloud computing and artificial intelligence, many of the topics that we've been talking about so far in the last day. So these changes really make it even more imperative that we embrace inclusive data approaches. At Data2X, we work through advocacy, strategic partnerships, and research to improve the quality, availability, and use of gender data to make a practical difference in the lives of women, girls, and gender-diverse people worldwide. The principles of inclusive data really revolve around several key ideas, and I'll dig into those with a brief illustration of how that applies in the gender data space. First, inclusive data is about representation. At Data2X, we understand gender data plays a crucial role in understanding and addressing gender inequalities, and including data on gender is a foundational part of inclusive data. It provides insights into the lived experiences and the needs of women, girls, and all people, enabling us to design policies, interventions that promote gender equality and improve lives of the broader communities with whom we hope to work. Second, inclusive data is about disaggregation and intersectionality of the identities we all carry, and which can provide richer, more complete pictures of what people need. An example of this, illustrated through Data2X's work, is our Women's Financial Inclusion Data Partnership. We recently conducted a 3-year study where we found that, looking across 6 countries, we found that if gender data were sufficiently used to create financial products and services tailored to the needs of women, the annual revenue opportunity of reaching unbanked or underserved women could be over $1 billion US dollars. More importantly, we'd be reaching women and girls and unbanked with products and services that can improve their lives and really understand a group that is typically underrepresented across various sectors. Third, inclusive data must be drawn from multiple sources and include traditional and non-traditional sources. We, in partnership with others, lead the Gender Data Network, for which we connect national statisticians and gender data focal points in 22 countries in Africa to one another and to resources that it can improve the ways that they can use gender data from multiple sources and link that data to the policy challenges that they face. We are expanding into Asia Pacific and soon to the ECLAC region. So please speak with me afterwards if you want to know more about that. Fourth, inclusivity goes hand in hand with respecting privacy and confidentiality. As we collect data, we must ensure that we do so with sensitivity, that we're intentional, and that we're safeguarding personal information and upholding the ethical standards that we've been touching upon in the last day or so. And we really see this taking on a new urgency, particularly when it comes to data about women, as AI systems consume data in new ways. And without care, these systems will replicate the biases and the discrimination that have consistently held communities and countries back and put women and other underserved groups at risk. Lastly, inclusive data requires human and technical capacity, which can only be put in place if there's adequate financing for data and data systems. In our work, we find that gender data financing still falls woefully short of what is needed. In research that we've done with Open Data Watch, we have calculated this at the tune of $500 million per year. So we're in the midst of a really important time, and that's why this conversation is so important. Inclusive data is not an end in itself. It's a means to informed decision-making. The goal is to use this data to shape policies, programs, and strategies that promote inclusivity and equality. And it's our belief and experience at Data2X that inclusive data and inclusive data systems lead to better data and better data systems. And it's only with these inclusive approaches that we can impact the data value chain, including the quality, availability, production, and use of data for real change. Whether that change is focused on access to services, gender equality policies, or more inclusive climate strategies, more accurate understanding of time use, or any of the other domains that we all work in. So our goal in this session today, first and foremost, is to generate a conversation and a dialogue about inclusive data by bringing together different perspectives and hearing from innovators, from practitioners, and many of you, as Jenna mentioned. We're really looking to bring together these different perspectives and come away with ways we can each commit to inclusive data, regardless of our areas of expertise. So with that, I turn it back to Jenna.
Great. Thank you, Krista. So I hope you're all warmed up now. It's time for our 4 speakers. So without further ado, I would like to call up Aiden Aaku, Mariana Roso, Jose Vieira, and Rose Bukina to join me on the stage. Wonderful. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we're not doing the traditional panel today. We're going to hear a story and some thoughts from each of these speakers in more of a lightning talk or TED Talk style, mini TED Talk style format. So I'm very excited to introduce for our first speaker, Aiden Aaku, who is the Executive Director of Twaweza East Africa. Aiden, over to you.
Thank you. May I stand? And I'd like to open up with a song for a minute. Karen, can you play my song for me, please? I don't sing. Anybody from Uganda here? Rosa, I know you're from Kenya. You might understand the words. I speak with volume. You can get up and dance if you wish. So this song is called Gemma, and it was inspired actually by some surveys that we did during the COVID-19 period, when we discovered that there were people who were actually quite hesitant about vaccines. What is the video with that? Right? There was vaccine hesitation, especially in the work that we were doing everywhere in Uganda. So of course, you bombard people with statistics about how vaccinations are good for you, etc., etc. But we felt it would be more effective to do a song. So we brought some artists together, and they did a song in about 3 or 4 languages. Now, I have got to be honest with you. I don't know whether it made any difference as to whether people went out and got more vaccinated. I don't know. We have not done that evaluation afterwards. But the data that we were able to collect on how people felt about COVID and vaccination and vaccines and other remedies that they were using to deal with the disease showed us that 3 out of 10 Ugandans were worried about this. So we thought maybe a way to persuade them is through music and art. And so survey data gave us this insight, and our response was to do something creative and produce this song. So that's one area. I'll tell you about a second story. Women in a place in a city called Kigoma in western Tanzania, in a very small neighborhood actually, were being assaulted, raped in their homes when their male partners had traveled or were not in the home. Horrible, horrible, horrific rape and physical assault incidents. But it was quiet. Whenever they tried to raise this issue, the city council and other government leaders and the police would just suppress this embarrassing news. But one of my colleagues decided, because she'd heard rumors, she would try and gather this real evidence. And so she was able to speak in the space of about 2 days to 45 women to whom this had happened. 45. They were completely ignored, completely discredited. But we found the evidence, 45 different incidents reported to the police, and nothing had happened. I took these numbers personally to the Minister for Home Affairs. He called the police officer, the police commander in that region. I only heard one half of the conversation, but the gist of it was, this is overblown, this actually doesn't exist. Then he goes to Parliament, the minister, and says, civil society is stirring up this community against the government. I've never been so angry in my life. And so we brought these women, not all 45, but 3 of the women came, and we had a press conference, and they told their story to Tanzania. And the woman who was head of the parliament at that time, we have rotating chairs, not right the speaker, but in the session, the woman from Zanzibar said to the minister, you have to deal with this. You have to deal with this. And so that qualitative data, that one-on-one interview, to Krista's point about protecting the dignity of women and giving them a safe space to tell their story, helped us do this, reveal this horrible assault that was happening. And it has drastically reduced since we blew it up and we made it public. And so including women who otherwise would never have had the opportunity, or who when they tried were discredited, helped solve that particularly horrible opportunistic rape. And then experimental data that we are generating as Twaweza to deal with the problem of the poverty of learning. In Tanzania, 61% from the experimental data that we've done, the surveys that we've done in schools, 61% of children after grade 7 or the end of primary education cannot read a simple sentence at grade 2 level. 61%. Imagine what this means for their life chances if their reading skills at the end of primary are so weak. We also discovered from experimental data that if you ask teachers, hey, will your students pass this particular assessment? 53% of them say, absolutely, my kids know how to read. And when we test them, only 20% can pass. So we discovered this gap. Teachers are overconfident, unfortunately, about the effectiveness of their teaching to children. They don't know that the kids are actually not learning at the rates and the levels that they are supposed to. And then the other thing that we found out are what we're calling orphaned classrooms. 1 in 3 of the classrooms in the 265 schools we just checked out earlier this year across the country, 1 in 3 had no teacher in it. 1 in 3 had no teacher in it. Lots of kids, but no teacher doing any teaching. And so we have, for the past 10 years, been experimenting with, based on that data of learning poverty, of overconfident teachers, of orphaned classrooms, experimenting with the process of motivating teachers so that they're actually applying themselves to their pedagogical task, to actually teaching and to producing learning, And this initiative, which we've called Kiu ya Kujifunza, or the thirst for learning, has the following result. That when you motivate teachers a priori at the beginning of the school year and tell them, if your children can pass this minimum thresholds, you will get a cash bonus, which we Twaweza are the ones who provide. You get a cash bonus. It produces learning outcome bump, increase, improvement, equivalent to almost an entire semester of teaching, or an extra 3 months of teaching during the same period. So does this solve completely the learning problem? I don't think so. But it has shown us a way to motivate teachers to actually produce learning and not just be in the classroom producing teaching. So this session is about inclusive data as recipe for success, the core of success. So if we want to succeed in pandemic preparedness, we need to be able to include people and where they are nervous about, if it is a medical treatment such as vaccination. We're able to do that. If you want to succeed at protecting women and keeping them safe in their own homes, we need to be able to be inclusive in how we approach and speak to them and find out what is really going on in their lives. If you want to succeed at improving the life chances, the life outcomes, the livelihoods of our children, especially in this age of digital fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, then we had better know what it is that they know how to do, how to read, and what are the drivers of that learning outcomes. And all of this requires including them, including their experiences, their lived experience in the data that we collect about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Aiden. Your stories and your experiences are incredible, and I think they really show also that telling one's story or sharing information or data is also really an act of courage. That we want to include people's voices and recognize and sort of honor that courage. So now we're going to move on to Mariana. Mariana Roso Paz is a Policy and Research Associate at the DataSphere Initiative. You're welcome to stay seated or to stand. Everyone, it's to your choice. And so over to you.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. So today, I'd actually like for all of you to please close your eyes like 10 seconds and just go back to when you were, 7 years old, maybe, and remember running around your house, close to your parents or caregivers, getting to them, and you heard that they were talking about you. Or maybe they were talking about something that interested you. And you approached them, and you wanted to participate in that conversation, but then you received this is an adults-only conversation. And you were forced to either leave the room or change the movie or change the, movie series, whatever you wanted to do. You can come back, to those of you who are still closing your eyes. And I just want to see a show of hands of who could relate to this experience of being excluded of a conversation because this was an adult-only conversation. I want to see a show of hands. Okay, lovely. I think the majority of us. And in the majority of the cases, our parents were right because probably they were having adult-only conversations. But this is what I wanted to use also as an introduction to talk about maybe what we've been talking for the whole day and keep on discussing through this Wednesday at Festival de Datos, which is young people. And I'll be sharing some data because this is the data festival, so why not? Did you know that 72 million pieces of personal data will be collected on every child around the world by their 13th birthday? Only in the US, 95% of young people have access to a smartphone. And 45% of them say that they're online almost constantly. The context in Europe is really not different. 96% of young people access the internet every day, but only 23% use the internet for civic and political participation. Africa's population is made up mainly of young people. And in Latin America, 2 out of 3 young people say that the lack of access to digital technologies hinders their ability to learn, which is also why almost half of them advocate for more investment in digital infrastructure. Now imagine being part of the most connected population ever, because literally young people are the most connected ever. Yet imagine being the most disconnected from these conversations and being told that this is an adult-only conversation. The frustration that I felt when I was 7 and I wanted to have these adult conversations with my parents is maybe the frustration that many young people are feeling nowadays. They're concerningly absent from the design of data-driven technologies that will be targeting them as main users. And they're absent from the data policy discussions in which we are making decisions on how to govern those data-driven technologies, in which we're deciding how to collect data about youth and about many other communities. At the Datasphere Initiative, we have launched the Youth for a Data Future project with the goal to close this gap between youth and decision makers. We, some months ago, launched a social media campaign that you can follow on Instagram and TikTok, in which we're engaging young people to talk about things such as gender data, mental health, education and skills, even privacy. Sometimes even we have some assumptions that young people don't care about privacy, and they just say yes to whatever service because they're young and they want to be connected. That's not true. They do care about privacy. They do care about education and skills, and they have ideas on how to collect data to improve mental health services. So we launched this campaign, and next year we will be conducting a series of youth labs in the US. And our ambition is also to expand this project to other regions of the world, because one of the big learnings of the project is that young people do not only want their voices leveraged and enhanced, but they also want to be connected. And they want to learn what are other young people doing in other parts of the world, and how can they improve their own experiences online by learning from others. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning young people again, and we'll hear about this all day, is because this experience of being underrepresented, sometimes not seen, sometimes excluded from the conversation, is not an experience that's unique to youth. It's the experience of women and girls, especially those coming, as I am, from Latin America, from Africa, from Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. It's the experience of LGBTQ people that are often not only not included in the conversation, but most of the times they're not included in the data either. And it's the experience of many other groups and communities that I can just keep on listing here. When it comes to talking about inclusive data, at the Datasphere Initiative, we're advocating for a more holistic and systemic approach, which means that we should go beyond just thinking about the quantitative questions on what are the right questions to be asking in a survey to make sure that we're capturing everybody. That, of course, is the first step. Because if we're not capturing realities in the data, then we'll be building services and AI systems and many other technologies that do not take these people into account. But inclusive data needs to go beyond that. And it implies, and this systemic approach means, that we're actually including people in the conversation. And we're being intentional with the participatory spaces that we're opening so that people such as young people, women and girls, LGBTQ people, and I can keep going with the list, have a seat at the table, and they are part of a conversation on how they want the structure inequalities of the societies that we live in being addressed, hopefully with data, and also thinking of the services that they need. So by opening these spaces up, by being intentional with a participatory approach, we will be, hopefully, shaping a more equitable data future and responsibly unlocking the value of data for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Loved your story, and you reminded me as a parent when I am not effectively including my young people in important conversations, so I appreciate that. Okay, now we're going to turn it over to Jose Vieira. Jose is the Advocacy Director and Senior Manager of the Global Disability Summit Secretariat for the International Disability Alliance. Jose, over to you.
All right, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are following us online. First of all, thanks to the organizers for giving us the chance to be here. I guess if we are talking about inclusive data, the first thing that we need to be doing is actually allowing persons with disabilities like me to be in the room. I was born and raised in Cordoba, Argentina, very close to here, and I'm really glad to see that this conversation is happening in South America. I think we have a lot to contribute from the region. But there is one thing that I believe is important for all of us to know. People with disabilities, we are 1.3 billion. If we were all from one same nation, we would be the third largest nation on earth, after China and India. I hope you heard me well. We should be considered the third largest nation in the world. However, we are definitely treated maybe as the smallest and most irrelevant group on earth. We are definitely excluded from many conversations, not only about disability, but about gender, about people with disabilities who are migrants, people with disabilities that are refugees, people with disabilities that belongs to the LGBTQ community, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, the level of inclusion of persons with disabilities, for us, remains just a political will. No much progress has been made in transforming those nice words that we hear here and there. You are great. You are so proud. We are so proud of you. You are changing the world. You are showing us how to be better. Those are just nice words. Those words do not change our life. Those words do not allow us to participate meaningfully in any conversation. And one of the main barriers that why we are not being allowed to be included in communities is because we do not collect enough data, useful and productive data, around persons with disabilities. Once I met a very young girl in a small town that she and her family were fighting for years to have accessible transport systems to go to school. And one day, the governor of that state listened to her and arranged accessible transportation. But they didn't collect data. And this girl told me that day that she could only go to the university on Monday morning on an accessible bus and only come back on Thursday afternoon because there was not sufficient bus accessible for that city, and only the accessible bus will reach her home Monday morning and Thursday afternoon again. And that is a clear example of the failure when we don't collect data in a meaningful way and we don't include persons with disabilities in the most correct and appropriate productive way. Unfortunately, if something was dramatic for the whole world was COVID, for persons with disability was even worse. We didn't have access to vaccines. The facilities where you could, if you were lucky enough to get a vaccine, were not accessible. People with disabilities couldn't have access to regular treatments because of their disabilities, because all facilities, hospitals, etc., were only for COVID. And basically, people with disabilities, in many cases, were left to die because doctors were instructed to choose people without disability over people with disabilities when saving life. It's real. It happened. And it happened in rich countries, in less developed countries, any part of the world. So our responsibility now is actually how we're going to change this reality. It is clear. We are going to fail for the SDGs. We are going to fail for implementing human rights standards. But we only have one little window, and that is to start doing much better around data. We need data to start defining better policies and programs. I always like to ask the same question: how can you define a budget for any policy, employment, education, if you don't even know how many we are, where we live, and what we need? And this is what we are failing on. But in any case, I think we always have to be hopeful. We always have to be clear on what we want to achieve, and I have a couple of solutions, or at least ideas, for you to keep thinking on. First one is bring people with disabilities into the conversation, but bring us meaningfully. Just don't bring us to validate what you have been working on. That doesn't matter to us. We don't want that. We want to have the preconditions to meaningfully participate. And preconditions are very simple. Accessibility, for instance, sign language for deaf people, easy to read format for people with intellectual disabilities, and many other ways of accessibility that we need to be included in the discussion. Number two, we as persons with disabilities and through our representative organizations, and there is a good news here, there are more than 1,500 organizations of persons with disabilities around the world. So you must reach out to those organizations, even when they're little and from a little town, to work with those organizations of persons with disabilities. We collect data. Once during COVID, a person with disability came to me and said, instead of going to the hospital, I went to the organization of persons with disabilities because they knew who I was and what I needed. We collect data. We generate data. We support and encourage citizen-generated data because this is what we do every single day from organization of persons with disabilities. The next recommendation that I really want to leave you with is that let's use data to define policies. I was hearing the other two speakers, and I was somehow jealous because they have data to compare. We don't even have data for persons with disabilities. We do not, because we don't collect data. It's time to do work. It's time to, instead of pack and go home, unpack and do more. And that is bringing us into the conversation, collect data for persons with disabilities, and use data for better policy and program discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, for such a strong call to action. There is so much work to do on disability-inclusive data. So now, for our last speaker, last but certainly not least, I'm very pleased to introduce Rose Bukina, the Principal Social Development Officer at the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of the Government of Kenya. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Jenna. You'll excuse me, I have a flu. The SC in Uruguay is just too much for my African blood. So I'm very happy to be standing before you today. And just like the previous speakers, I just want to touch on data use and how data, when data is used, can either bring people to be included or excluded. I work in the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, and we work with older persons, persons with disabilities. We work in the communities, and we work with vulnerable and marginalized groups. In 2018, at the Global Disability Summit, we were able to sign to the Inclusive Data Charter. And we went even further as a nation with partners and developed the Inclusive Data Charter Action Plan. And we even have an IDC champion. He's seated right there at the back. So we use our champion to champion ministries, departments, counties, to ensure when they collect data, they follow the principles of the Inclusive Data Charter. However, much we have gone ahead with that program, we still have some loopholes. Private sector. There is so much government can do to influence private sector when they collect data to make sure that it's inclusive. And I just want to give an example of a 72-year-old woman. I know today we've been on the go with youth, but maybe I just want to talk a little bit about older persons because those are the people that we deal with. And remember, the older you grow, the more likely you are to also have a disability. So how are we using the data we are collecting for older persons to make sure that they're included in this world of technology? And the example I want to give is in Kenya, we have a very vibrant telecommunication. Literally with your phone, you can walk into any shop. You can even pay for a flight using your phone. We have something they call till numbers. So our telecommunication companies have till numbers. You register, you're able to be given a till number as an individual, and if someone comes to purchase something from you, they simply go to their phone, pay to your till number, so it's almost like an account number. And many people who do business love using the till number, including the older persons. So at one time in Kenya, we were able to re-register our SIM cards. I'm sure all of you know about the SIM cards. So we collected data, including our biodata, names, age, all that data, disaggregated, which was a plus for us. The data was put in the system. So this old 72-year-old woman knew that the data was working for her. And I want us to focus on an old woman in a village in Kenya, not in the city where internet is accessible, all these things that we have. And this is a person who hasn't interacted with technology. So she wants to register for this till number because she does business on the farm and she doesn't want to hold money. She was struck with COVID in 2021. So for her not to go back and be vulnerable, she decided instead of people giving her money, let them pay through the till. So she knew that she had already registered with the telecommunication company, so definitely her data is already in the system. So she went to the internet, she tried her best, she was able to log in, and now the same company which had taken her data was asking her to, again, input all her data. So she thought it was a security thing. She did. She put in all her data. And they send for you something they call a one-time password. So that one-time password comes to your mobile number, and you're supposed to quickly log it into the website so that you get the till number. This is an old 72-year-old woman. So that system is rigged against her. It is too fast. She's not able to do it. It takes her 2 days to be able to get this one-time password into the system. So once she's done that, she believes like, okay, now my data was collected by this company, so it's going to be easy. Now I'll be able to get my till number. No. They ask her to fill again everything, including her identification card, everything back into the same system of the same company that she had registered. So the question is, why do we collect data from the communities that we're not putting to use to make their lives better in terms of even technology? So she ends up feeling excluded, and had it not been for her daughter to have persuaded her to keep going until she got the till number, she would have given up. So this comes to the Inclusive Data Charter, where we talk about building human capacities. So the private sector that is developing these systems and collecting all this data is not utilizing it to inform their policies so that they're making everyone to be included. So we can talk about the leave no one behind agenda, focusing on those maybe who are able to be accessed by these services, but we forget about the older people in the rural areas who the world is moving too fast for them. And no one is really considering them when it comes to the data they're collecting for them to inform them to develop programs for them. So I just want to reiterate what my colleague said here about using data, inclusive data, because we collect it to the point where it's disaggregated to inform how we develop policies, to inform how we develop programs, so that everyone feels included. So we are talking about across the life cycle. Basically in the ministry, what we do, personally, I work a lot with persons with disabilities, and I was so happy to hear what my colleague was talking about, because we were part of that forum of the IDA, the International Disability Alliance. We worked with them together as we did the Global Disability Summit and came up with that action plan. And we continue to work with partners in ensuring that this inclusive data is capturing all the details of all the people so that services are actually inclusive. So I will just want to reiterate one more time. Let's collect data. Let's use data to improve the lives of everyone across the life cycle, including the older women and older men in our villages. Let it not only be the technology that is working for the people in the towns, but also to the people who are working and living in the remote areas of Africa and all over the country. With those few remarks, I say thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that. I would have said much more, but I feel a cough is coming on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for powering through. Thank you for reminding us and bringing us full circle from youth earlier in the last session to older persons, and also reminding us that social protection and inclusion is not just for the social sector or the public sector, but also companies need to be thinking about these questions and the way that they include or exclude individuals. So now it's time for all of you to share with us, and for that portion of the session this morning, I want to invite Fiona Lawless from Sightsavers to moderate this portion.
I don't know if this is, okay, it's working now. I don't know if you're like me, but I have many pages full of notes from the great speakers. So I'm sure some of you may have questions, thoughts, Insights, solutions. I particularly welcome solutions about how we can be more inclusive. And I think that the title, we thought a lot about the title of this session as inclusion of being the foundation for success. Because if we don't build a strong foundation, we can't build up on that to have a more equal and just society. So we're turning over to you. Whether it's a comment, whether it's a question, whether it's simply an experience you have, whether it's a question for me or for our amazing panelists or TED Talk speakers, please feel free to come towards one of the microphones. If you take too long, I may call on someone. So if I have spoken to you previously, you may get called on. Do we have any questions? If not, I can continue talking. Yes. Please come up to the microphone.
Thank you, speakers. That was really inspiring. I'm Gezoma Kubalo from Statistics Botswana. I think I'm really inspired. I just want to say, really, this kept me thinking. As I'm from NSO, so what is it that we can do so that when we do these surveys, we really have to include everyone, and also one thing that I was thinking, I heard that you are also collecting data, but sometimes you find that data from private companies or from civil society organizations in my country sometimes it's so difficult to get hold of that data so that it can be used by policymakers. So I don't know what will be your advice on that one. Thank you.
Is there anyone in particular that would like to address that question? Thanks.
Hello, hi. Just very quickly, again, I'm from Tanzania, but our neighbors to the north, Kenya, where Rose comes from, and the data champions there, and Colombia, have got a great system for including and validating citizen-generated data from private companies and from civil society organizations such as ours in Tuaweza. They've taken our wealth of education, learning assessment data and have made it into official data that the Kenyan government can use. So if you speak to them, maybe Rose and others here, they have a great set of criteria for validating and for including privately generated data, citizen-generated data in official statistics that can be useful and valuable for you.
Thank you. And I think I would echo what Jose said as well. And it's including people in the planning of the data. So if you don't include the communities who you want to collect data on from the start, you need to meaningfully include them. And that can help with what you were saying about what questions and how to include. So including the communities you want to collect data on.
I would want to
add
put.
something, Jose?
Thank you, Fiona. But when it comes to persons with disabilities, and I'm sure we can extrapolate this to other communities, I think it's important to identify the role that multiple stakeholders can play in this kind of joint endeavor. We have in the room here one of our closest partner, CBM Global Disability Inclusion, that together with Ida we are working for, I don't know now, like 5 or 6 years in developing resources in the form of toolkits, in the form of workshops, and actually we have a session later on about that. Because I really believe, or what I hear when I speak with people with disabilities around the world is that we as a community are more used to work with ministries of health, social affairs, because those are maybe more top priorities. But when it comes to working with NSOs, with policymakers that are working on data, et cetera, we are still having that gap of how to connect with them. So I think it's a matter of connecting with persons with disabilities through the representative organizations, getting trained on how to include persons with disabilities, and also see organization of persons with disabilities as citizen-generated data stakeholders, and also bringing or facilitating the information that you collect to persons with disabilities.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes? You can make your way towards the microphone, and if we have a queue, I know Irish people love a queue. I don't know about Latin Americans, but we love a queue.
Hi, thanks very much. My name is Albert Modavans, and I'm with EcoMeasures 2030. And thanks to the organizers and to the panelists, I really feel at home talking about these issues. I could listen and talk to you all day, but I'll try to keep my comments short. I kind of have an observation, which is about, some of the work that we do is around connecting women's and girls' rights organizations, with data and with the power of data. And I think it's also a kind of a two-way street in a way. I think you're all wonderful advocates for using data to leverage all of your issues. And I think, Jose, the number you gave about the billion persons over a billion persons in the world with disabilities is a super compelling fact that, can't fail to get everybody's attention. And so you're good at it and you know what you're doing, but I think a lot of other kind of, especially grassroots organizations don't have the capacities or are just building the capacities. And I think, there's something, there. And I think one of the things that we've done is try to work with groups. Some already have great capacity and are doing a great job already. But we have kind of training programs that work on turning data into advocacy. For youth organizations, for persons with disability, and for other groups, and that's helpful. But I think part of the challenge is getting, civil society mobilized around the use of data and to show them how this can be part of their toolbox, or part of their, that they can use this as a powerful way to kind of leverage their influencing their issues in a way that maybe they can't do alone with highly contextualized, small-scale research, that it gives them more power. So that's one way. But then I also have a long background in data production. And so I know the challenges when it comes to groups saying, oh, well, we need data on our issue. And if you look around the world at the NSOs, I'm sure many of you in this room, know how limited the resources are in social statistics and how big burdens you're already facing. But I think, there's a value proposition there. And I think I would really look to the examples of Kenya, to Ghana, to the UK, about how they've been able to kind of leverage civil society, to kind of bring that expertise about these special groups of people, about these special populations, like who are they, where are they, what are the characteristics that may not be in the social statistics department of the NSO. So I think there's something to develop there, and I don't know, maybe I can turn this into a question for the panelists, is how do we articulate that value proposition? How do we make those linkages stronger? How do we amplify some of the good examples that we see already? So sorry for going on so long, but really appreciate the presentations.
No, I think it's an interesting insight. And I think that's kind of the point of this session, is that we start thinking about how to do that. Does anyone want to give some insights particularly?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Thank you so much for that. I think it's a tough question, series of questions and reflections. And I love that conversation, and particularly something that I've been thinking just for the past month especially. It's I think that we need to start, and I'm saying think 100 times, but to rethink capacity building too. And we've gotten to a point in which capacity building programs are very much focused on giving people data and hard skills so that they can do the, programming. But we're not thinking of precisely what type of soft skills does civil society need so that they're able to engage in these conversations. And when we think about civil society, it's not just the group of NGOs that want to work on this. It's specifically the communities, and going to the communities so that we can appeal to what matters to each one of the communities, so that based on that, they can also connect to data or digital technologies. In our experience working with youth, if you go to a 14-year-old person and start talking about data and how data is collected and data governance, it's like, what are you talking about? I don't care about that, what's going on. But then when we get smarter with the questions and we start appealing to what really matters to them, so you talk about social media or mental health, that's when you get their attention. And it's not because we're being strategic to talk about data. It's because that's what matters to them. And therefore, those are the topics and the ways in which we can also rethink capacity building so that then it's more soft skills and how can I advocate for what I need? How can I share with the rest of the world and those that are making decisions how I need to be addressed or the challenge that I have? So I'm just thinking, yeah, I mean, like, what I would start saying to that is I think that we need to start rebuilding what we understand as capacity building and make sure that this comes from the communities itself. And I think there are very good examples, at least in Latin America, on how different communities are connecting around this. And I personally lead an initiative in Colombia. It's called Be Bold. And we are doing capacity building in a very different way with girls and young women, to pretty much teach them and like share this knowledge and soft skills that we need to engage in these conversations and not necessarily do the hard part of programming, but rather making sure that everyone's involved in the conversation. That's what I would start saying, but it's a very complex issue.
I think what I'd like to do is, does anyone have a solution to that problem or an example? Please come up to the mic. I think if there's a lot of really intelligent and really experienced people here, if you have a solution that you can bring to the table that maybe we don't know about, I think it would be great to hear your perspective.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sally Duta. I work with United Disabled Persons of Kenya, UDPK. We are an organization of persons with disabilities, and essentially we are an umbrella, so we are at national level. And because we cannot also be everywhere in Kenya, we have 47 local governments. And each of these 47 governments do plan and they deliver services in their localities. And in Kenya, participation is a right. Every time the government plans, they have to have citizen inputs. And if that is not provided, then as a citizen, you can challenge that. So as UDPK, we also strategically empower persons with disabilities, particularly OPDs, because like Jose has said, organizations of persons with disabilities are everywhere. And they might not be your ideal organization in the sense that they have structures, an office, etc. OPDs are essentially persons with disabilities who have come together and they're pushing for a certain interest. So for us, because at national level, we have access to, certain, opportunities and also linkages with other partners. And also we work very closely with the International Disability Alliance, CBM Global. They also provide to us, technical support as OPDs. So, capacity strengthening for us, or capacity building essential, is not just workshop, but also that providing that platform for peer exchange is very important. For us, that works very well in Kenya because OPDs in different localities have different experiences. And for us, we provide opportunities for them to share experiences, learn from each other, and ask questions. So that way, it builds their capacities on different areas. So capacity strengthening is so important. Right now, globally and even within Kenya, there's a lot of talk about citizen-generated data. And Jose has said that we as OPDs also generate data. Like in Kenya, the Bureau of Statistics has come up with a criteria on, how citizen-generated data can be, adopted and used to support official data. So even as OPDs, we want to understand how can our data, we have a lot of data about persons with disabilities, and as someone said in the morning, it's not just about data, but it's about lived experiences of persons with disabilities, on different issues. So we want to understand how can our data also make it so that it can fill the gaps that we have in terms of data on persons with disabilities. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing a solution to the table and experience. And I think it's really interesting to hear, often civil society and non-state actors are a little bit, have different viewpoints to government, and it's interesting to hear how both Rose and yourself are talking about not only collecting the data, but also using it to inform policies and the developments that are going on in Kenya. Now, in the theory of inclusion, I would really like to invite a Spanish speaker to ask a question. I do have my interpretation headset here, so, and that would be great. Thank you. Can we get the mic?
Okay, hi. I come from the Country Office of UN Women in Colombia. I just wanted to make my introduction in English so that everybody can understand, but I will go ahead and make my intervention in Spanish. Bueno, en primer lugar,
first of all, I want to thank all the speakers for sharing their experiences today. I think that indeed this is an audience that makes it possible for us to reflect on the different ways we can collect the process, analyze, and use the data much more inclusive. I basically wanted to do two things. First of all, to share an experience, a successful experience that we have at the Women's Office in Colombia. We started working with projects with women and girls with ONFPA and UNICEF, women with people with disabilities, very recently. But part of the initiative is to support the civil society organizations, especially of people with disabilities, so that to provide them advocacy strategies so that we can do what many of the things that were mentioned here. Because in Colombia, we also face many of the challenges around inclusive data, especially intersection between gender and disabilities. So we developed a project for developing data. We call it a rapid gender assessment, specifically targeting people with disability in Colombia. So there are many technical details behind it, but the good thing is that we reached 587 people with disabilities, most of them women, and this was the first time that they got involved in a process of data gathering. And as they did, well, we wanted that to meet all of the conditions of accessibility and all the conditions necessary for the effective participation of the persons with disability. And that was a wonderful trigger, not only because it was the first time that many of them were engaged in collecting data like this, but it also triggered people's interest in the use that the data would have. So today, that rapid gender assessment informed situation analysis of girls and women with disabilities in Colombia. That was used by many actors, the state, government, and civil society, and that triggered a cascade of events. And the civil society, especially the associations of persons with disabilities, have repeatedly told us that they were interested in learning more about the production, analysis, and dissemination of data, because they found that that experience, that may be rather small, empowers them to participate in advocacy discussions, existing advocacy discussions in a different way, with data, with evidence, and that provides them the tools to be able to talk to the national and local authorities. So today, although this paper is being used at a high technical government level, it's also very popular among civil society organizations, both on the territories, demanding the presence, or rather the fact that they should be provided health and social inclusion services, and also for shadow reports in the hands of people with disabilities in Colombia, and in considering also the rights of those people. And it's been very interesting because we succeeded in raising the interest of the women with disability that are not typically very visible, at least in Colombia. It's very hard for them to create linkages with the broader women's movements. So that was a shared experience. And not only did the movements get together, but they empowered each other and they improved the virtuous side. Cycle. So it's been a very successful exercise. It was rather short, but it had an avalanche of chain reactions. And obviously, of course, there are many lessons to be learned yet. And as Mariana pointed out, how can we achieve? How can we address the points of interest of the people with disabilities effectively? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know we had someone over here who was waving quite wildly at me. That would be great if you can take, and that will be the last intervention that we will have. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My so good, but I speak in French and my friend.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Ok. Merci pour les présentateurs. Je voudrais vraiment savoir comment ils se sont pris dans leur pays pour assurer la fiabilité des données collectées, dans la mesure où on sait que pour que l'inclusivité puisse vraiment aider à prendre des décisions pour ne laisser personne de côté, il faille s'assurer de la fiabilité des données collectées.
Thank you so much. I want to ask the panelists, how did you go about it in your country, making sure on the viability of the data, knowing that when we talk about inclusivity, we're trying to say that everybody should be included and all data, but how are you ensure the viability of those data?
So, well, I think that's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, we are rapidly running out of time. But what I would encourage you all to do is, these panelists are here. Please speak outside this session or at the end of this session. Also, there are many of us here working on inclusive data, and there will definitely be insights that we can share beyond just this session and continue to share, because this is just the start of the conversation. So if you are interested and have a question to ask, I am sure the panelists won't mind me volunteering them to answer some of your questions following this session. And with that, I would like to thank the panelists. Your insights were absolutely invaluable, and I think it has really, really set the tone of the foundations that we need to be inclusive. And I would like to invite you to leave the stage, and I would invite my two co-hosts, Jenna and Krista, back up. And I'm actually going to introduce myself again. My name is Fiona Lawless. I work for Sightsavers. And Sightsavers is an international NGO, and we work on disability inclusion and avoidable blindness around the world. And I just wanted to give a few thoughts about this session and kind of reflections on what we've just heard. We heard a lot about needing to include people along the whole data value chain, including from the start of the conversation in the planning on the data collection, right up to the use and the policy analysis and the policy development, particularly as Rose highlighted, about making sure that we're using the data to inform policies and programs. And I think that's something that we really need to think about. And particularly the intervention from Colombia there, where she spoke about intersectionality and the multiple forms of discrimination that people face. So within Sightsavers, we talk a lot about persons with disabilities, but we also talk about the intersection of marginalizations that people experience. So whether that's women and girls with disabilities, whether that's LGBTQI persons with disabilities, and all of the people who experience multiple intersecting forms of disabilities. As Jenna said at the start, we know that we are rapidly off track to achieve the SDGs, and actually the data around disability is really stark. Of the 11 indicators that need to be disaggregated by disability, we have data for 2. How we're going to achieve these by 2030 is something that is can seem insurmountable. But if we're building a foundation and a strong foundation on which to build what we all want, which is a fairer and more equitable world, we need to make that foundation strong and we need to make that foundation inclusive. And with that, what I want to do is actually highlight a couple of other discussions that will be happening. 2 lightning talks in which 2 of my colleagues will be speaking at. So we'll be talking this afternoon, a little lightning talk around localization and inclusive data with experiences in Cameroon. And then tomorrow, we'll be talking about inclusive data and opportunities using experiences that we've realized and noticed in our East and Southern Africa region. But what I really want you to think about when you leave here is how you can incorporate inclusion more systemically in the work that you are already doing. And how inclusion is beyond just one aspect. It's not just gender, it's not just youth, it's not just disability. Inclusive means all of these things. And when we were talking about this session and what we wanted to get out of this session, or what we wanted the audience to get out of this session, was to think about inclusion and to think how you can intersect it into the work that you're already doing. And similarly to what I said about with the panel earlier, I'm happy to answer any questions that you want. I'm not going to speak for Jenna or Krista, but I know that me and my colleagues Teacha and Nick will be happy to answer any questions, particularly about our experience with inclusive data from a Sightsavers point of view. So please do feel free to either come to our sessions and ask a question or grab us in the hallway.
All right, thank you. In the face of some of the challenges that we've been hearing about today in terms of meeting the SDGs, tracking data around different SDGs, and the various challenges before us, I actually want to highlight Jose's call to unpack and dig in and work together so that we can create the inclusive data foundations that we've been talking about today. And in particular, collecting meaningful data, as was highlighted in the panel, making sure that we are using that data to connect to one another as humans, telling the stories, capturing the insights, and the human side of why we collect this data and information. And I would challenge us also to have an inclusive definition of the problems we're trying to solve, and then to use the appropriate data to kind of solve those problems. And then lastly, I really appreciated the points around capacity building and the different skills that are going to be needed in order to reach the SDGs, monitor the data, and to carry us beyond the challenges that we're facing today.
Thanks, Krista, and thanks, Fiona. Thank you to all of you for some incredible participation. So we have 2 more quick treats for you as part of this session. But before we get on to that, I just want to highlight, that the discussion today has really emphasized that we need to not only keep working on inclusion and inclusive data, but we at the Global Partnership need to even accelerate our efforts. And we're going to do that in 3 specific ways. One is going well beyond data disaggregation, though we know that's important, and looking at data processes across the entire value chain from production to dissemination and ensuring that people are included. We'll do this by bringing together knowledge, sharing, learning, exchange, and working really closely with the Inclusive Data Charter champions as they implement their action plans, which you heard a little bit about today. Secondly, we're going to increase and double down on our work on the collaborative on citizen data. So that's a collection of organizations convened by the UN Statistics Division, developing frameworks and best practices for the kind of citizen-generated data we heard about today and that we all know is incredibly important. And lastly, we've continued to hear here at the festival and from our network more generally that inclusive data and digital technology are inextricably linked. It's not just an option to make data more inclusive. It's a moral imperative as we live in a digital economy and a digital world. So we commit to tackle both of them in tandem in our global policy work. So now, to put a little bit even more oomph behind those ideas, we have a special announcement, and I'd like to call to the stage Maria Paula from the Presidential Agency for International Cooperation of Colombia, APC Colombia, to make a quick announcement.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for this opportunity and for the invitation to represent the Presidential Agency for International Cooperation of Colombia in this space. Together with Dani and the Global Partnership for Data for Sustainable Development, we joined this alliance. We want to contribute jointly to the construction of inclusive data for the success of the Agenda 2030. This partnership that I'm honored to announce today will operate for 2 years and is supported by GPSDD, who will act as facilitator, catalyzing knowledge, identifying good practices, and who will act as a bridge between the statistics agencies of Colombia, Kenya, and Ghana. Our aim is not just to contribute to the commitment of governments of not leaving anyone behind in the implementation of SDGs, but also to support governments to help them meet their commitments and the Inclusive Data Charter and its 5 principles, strengthening the generation and analysis and use of disaggregated and inclusive data. Colombia recognizes the key role and the catalyzing effect of international cooperation, and that has been the point of departure to make the political decision of strengthening, among others, its relation, not just to diversify the themes and the players with whom we relate, but also to find new sources of funding for development and expanding the geographical scope to learn, among other successful examples of the inclusion of data generated by citizens. The National Administrative Department of Statistics of Colombia, as a member of the initiative of the Inclusive Data Charter, has implemented practices disaggregating intersectional and differential data that may enrich the statistical management in Kenya and Ghana. However, as a leading entity in our region, we also seek to learn from the integration of inclusive data, those related with disabilities, gender-related violence, and marine waste in the statistical operations, so that we can promote intersectionality as a way of promoting a better understanding on the barriers and gaps, so as not to leave anyone behind. Increasing the use of data to enhance and promote social inclusion, economic and political inclusion for all, regardless of their age, sex, and race, ethnicity, religion, or economic status, is undoubtedly one of the key benefits of this multi-actor proposal for the strengthening of capacities. It is because of that Colombia joins the GPSDD mission to eliminate barriers to harness the data and promote a more effective decision-making for our citizens. Once again, I want to thank the GPSDD team, and we want to thank them for counting with Colombia through the Presidential Agency for International Cooperation, giving us a possibility to improve the capacities and the management of data for decision-making. Thank you.
Gracias, Maria Paula.
Thank you, Maria Paula.
Special treat for which you will need the glasses on the seats. So I'm pleased to introduce Soraya Talero from Fundación WWB, one of our IDC champions, or Inclusive Data Charter champions, to share a quick intro to the video you're about to see.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. You've enjoyed the talks this morning. I am Soraya Hussein Talero, Research Director at Fundación WWB Colombia. For you, all of you that don't know us, we are based in the southeastern region of Colombia, in Cali. Of course, you're welcome to visit us. And our purpose is to work and contribute to the reduction of inequalities that affect women and promote their participation in economic and social development. We have been doing this for over 40 years, and our programs are in most regions of Colombia, in 5 countries in Latin America, and we do it through training, specifically around autonomy, economic and social autonomy of women. We also work with, of course, research. We know the importance of data and the whole process involved in research and then giving back our data and our research to the communities to be able to make changes. And we also do investments in social impact funds. And all of this, of course, we always use a gender perspective. We think this is really important, as we just heard. It's not the only perspective we should use, but it's certainly one that needs to be used in order to be more inclusive. So I'm going to invite you to watch a video, and at the end, I'll tell you more about this invitation. So if we could please play the video.
¿Es tan fácil encasillar a las personas? Cuando lo haces, le pones a alguien una etiqueta para bien o para mal. Pero cuando encasillas a una mujer, le pones un peso adicional.
Es amenazante porque tiene poder y éxito. ¿Cómo habrá llegado tan lejos?
No se ha desarrollado plenamente porque no tiene hijos.
Se hace la dura cuando está negociando.
Es la mujer 10. Como le gusta hacerlo todo, ¿para qué la ayudo?
Es muy alborotada porque decide sobre su cuerpo, sus preferencias y su sexualidad.
Es rara porque hace cosa de hombres.
No hace nada. Se queda en la casa cuidando a los hijos.
Pobrecita, está sola.
Está histérica, debe estar en esos días.
Deja de encasillar. Lo realmente importante es ser. Ser humano.
Ser bondadoso con uno mismo, con otros.
Soltar y dejar ser a los demás.
Amarse, valorarse, reír, bailar, llorar.
Ser justo y no juzgar.
Ser personas empáticas.
Ser, sin presiones de ser perfectas o perfectos.
No hay límites para lograr lo que quieres.
Eres un ser único, no hay dos como tú.
Tus habilidades y cualidades no las tiene ninguna otra persona en el mundo.
Se vale caerse y levantarse 1 y 1000 veces. En eso consiste la resiliencia.
Desaprender es volver a aprender.
Tómate el tiempo para construir tu mejor versión. Sin culpas. Todos los días se puede volver a empezar.
Ponerse los lentes de género te permitirá ver el mundo de otra manera. Serás consciente de generar acciones que contribuirán al logro de la igualdad de género para lograr un mundo más sostenible. Usarlos te cambiará la forma de ver la vida. Súmate al impulso transformador poniéndote los lentes de género. Fundación WWB Colombia. 40 años impulsando el poder transformador de las mujeres.
Okay, so I would like to invite you all to wear your lenses. And you will see how this changes your life. The way you see things, the perspective that you have on all the problems that we've been talking about today, and hopefully solutions. We need to start bringing up solutions using a gender lens. As it says here in the little card that we gave you, it's in Spanish. We hope it changes your life. You will be more conscious of all those actions in order to contribute to gender equality, to be able to build a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. So thank you very much, and we hope you've enjoyed the session, and don't forget to always use your gender lenses. Thanks.
Thank you. Well,
gracias. Bueno, qué sesión más interesante. Perdón porque nos pasamos un poquito de horario. Como saben, empezamos tarde la sesión de esta mañana. Pero gracias por estar con nosotros y por la participación activa. Gracias a las panelistas que estuvieron estupendos y a los videos con los anuncios. Por favor, continúen pensando cómo hacemos que los datos sean más inclusivos y cómo construir la inclusión en todas las tareas que ustedes participan. Y los invitamos también a conversar, a acercarse a cualquiera que haya participado en el panel de hoy para poder hablar de su experiencia, y estoy segura que va a ser muy interesante para ambas partes. Muchas gracias y disfruten el resto del festival.